So have you ever met someone that you wish you had never met? Anybody else? Don't be pointing to anybody, okay, right now. But maybe you have met someone that you think, that person just didn't serve me well. That person brought me down. That probably was nothing positive by meeting that person. Maybe there was a person in your life, maybe it was someone that your husband met or somebody that your wife met. Maybe it was somebody that your child met that you say, I wish that they would never have met that person. Here's the truth that we want to just kind of hear today, okay? And it's this: our greatest regret involved the people we have met. I mean, isn't that true? I mean, our greatest regret involves people, and usually they are people that are our friends, people who are closest to us. We're in our second week of this series, Guardrails. And this is not an all-new original series. This is not even a series that is mine. I told you last week that this is a series of Andy Stanley's that's been around for a little while, and he's preached it a couple times. I'm preaching it now. It's just good material. Someone last week said, boy, that was a great message. And I said, well, you can thank Andy Stanley for that. And they said, well, it was a great message. Thank you, Andy, whoever you are. And that's kind of how I feel about this too. You may not know Andy Stanley, not know much about him, but this material has been so helpful for so many people. It's helpful for me. And so I wanted to share it with you. I want to say, too, that it's the kind of series, perhaps, that maybe when you listen, you say, boy, that is such good stuff that so-and-so needs to hear. And it could be that. And it could be that you are led by God's Spirit to pass this information on to other people. But I want us today to really just dive into allow the Holy Spirit to speak to us. What does He want to say to us today? I also would encourage you maybe to take some notes down, especially at the end where we're just going to talk about some guardrails. It may be that you want to get your camera out and take some pictures so that you can remember some of these things. This is good material. It's not mine, so I can say it's great material, okay? But I believe that people's lives will be changed because we have dove into this series. Some of you missed last week and you're thinking, well, what is this all about, this guardrails? Well, a guardrail is a system designed to keep vehicles from straying into dangerous or off-limit areas. Guardrails are set in place to help direct us and to protect us. Guardrails are never placed in the danger zone. They're always placed in the safety zone. Okay, we could argue that there's a little bit more real estate, that we could go to and still be safe, but we still logically know that we don't want the guardrail in the danger zone. We don't even want it right on the line. We want it somewhere within the safety zone. Guardrails, we understand, are there to kind of minimize damage. You may have to take your car to the body shop once you hit a guardrail, but you may not have to go to the hospital because you hit the guardrail. They're there to minimize the damage. In this series, we're making the connection that in the same way that guardrails are something that help us along the roadways, we need in our life guardrails, some things that will keep us out of the danger zone, some things that are within the safety zone that we still say, okay, I maybe could go there without sinning, but I need to be back here in order to be wise. The way that we have defined it in this context is, well, we recognize our greatest regrets could have been avoided if we would have had some guardrails in life. And so we have kind of defined it this way in regards to personal convictions. It's personal standard. Guardrails are a personal standard of behavior that becomes a matter of conscience. We may look at something and say, well, this may not be a sin for me to do this, but it is unwise for me to be here. It's just too close to the edge. I want to bump up against something so that I say, okay, I'm getting too close to the edge before it's too late and I fall off the edge into the ditch. Okay? That's what we're talking about in this series. And today, we look at establishing guardrails in regard to our closest relationships, our friendships, our work associates, those people that we hang out with a lot of our lives. And the reason that we need to look at these as it relates to establishing personal convictions is because, as we already said, next slide. Oh, I missed all that. Remember that? Culture doesn't encourage guardrails. Culture is content with painted lines. They're gonna mess with you. They're gonna say, well, it's no big deal. Because they don't put guardrails up. It's just, I can cross this line easily. And they're not gonna be wowed about your personal convictions on a certain thing, the rules that you have set up. But we understand that we need rules in our lives because our greatest regret involves the people we have met. What makes a friendship so marvelous is also what makes it so dangerous. And that is this. Friendships are great in that we can get close to people. We can feel safe with those people. We can let down our guard with those people. And see, that can make friendships really great. Because sometimes you need a safe place where you can just be yourself and really be real with somebody and then know that it's a safe place. But we also recognize that which makes friendships so marvelous can make it so dangerous because it's in those places in our friendships where we let down our guard. And that's why we need guardrails in our closest relationships. We can say it this way. Our friends determine the direction and the quality of our lives. Behavioral science has been saying this for years, for a long time. You know, that you are who you hang out with. But now, did you know that science is actually backing this up neurologically? They've actually shown that brain waves align with the people, your brain waves align with the people that you are closest to. That's fascinating to me. Which also tells us you better be careful who you're hanging out with right now, right? Who's on your left, who's on your right. Your brain waves can align with those people. There was an article that was written on this subject, and the author was a neurologist, and he made this conclusion. If people want to maximize happiness and minimize stress, they should build a life that requires few decisions by surrounding themselves with people who embody the traits they prefer. What he's getting at is just hanging around the people that you want to be like, you will actually become more like that person. It almost happens automatically. It happens without you trying hard to do it. It happens without even decision making in it. You could just kind of, without any effort, without any decision on your part, your brain will begin to align with the people who are becoming the kind of person you ultimately want to be. And so he concludes with this statement. Over time, they'll naturally pick up those desirable attitudes and behaviors. Of course, we understand that the flip side of that is also true, that if you hang around the wrong people, you will automatically, naturally, pick up those undesirable attitudes and behaviors. Your future will be impacted by the people you spend time with, who you do community with, who you do life with. Interestingly enough, 3,000 years ago, before we were able to look at brain scans, King Solomon Wise King Solomon, wisdom from above, wisdom from heaven, right? Said these words. He said, walk with the wise and become wise. That's exactly what science is telling us today. Walk with the wise and become wise. Automatically, with no effort really, no intentionality, no studying for a test. Walk with the wise and you will become wise over time. Wisdom is contagious. Isn't that good news? So hang around wise people. Hang out with people who have the preferred future that you want. Hopefully the preferred future is wisdom, right? And then he continues. This is what King Solomon continues. Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. Now understand, a fool, we don't use that term a whole lot today. I hope you don't use that term a whole lot today. But that term, as it is used in Scripture, basically, and a lot of times in Proverbs, is really talking about the people who are just not careful. They're unwise. They're not careful. They're the people that don't recognize that the past will kind of determine your present. And that your present is kind of a determining factor for your future. They just live for the day. And what is interesting in what Solomon says here is really in what Solomon doesn't say here. He says, walk with the wise and become wise. And you might think that if he's saying this, that he would say, for a companion of fools will become a fool. But that's not what he says. He actually says that it's worse than that. A companion of fools suffers harm. Have you noticed that before? You hang around with trouble, you get in trouble. And that's what King Solomon is saying here. But you walk with the wise, you'll become wise. It's a proximity thing. The closer you are to people, the greater the chance that when they make a foolish decision, that you will suffer harm. But the more that you hang out with wise people, the greater the chance you will make the wise decision. It's a proximity thing. Parents, we've lived by this for years, right? You are not hanging out with that person. You're not hanging out with that kid because they lack good judgment. And if they get in trouble, you will get in trouble. Don't hang out with trouble. And this is what Solomon is saying. Friends who aren't careful with their lives won't be careful with your life. Somebody write that down, okay? I mean, this is good. This is truth, isn't it? Friends who aren't careful with their lives won't be careful with your life. Friends who aren't careful with their health aren't going to care if you take a drag on that and harm your health. Right? Friends who don't watch their finances aren't going to guard your finances. Friends who aren't careful in their relationships aren't going to be careful in the relationship that they have with you. Friends who aren't careful in their marriages won't be careful with your marriage. Here's how that goes. If someone who's married begins to flirt with you and wants to date you, you got to run. Because wisdom says they are not going to be good for you if they don't know how to take care of their current marriage. Why would they know how to take care of a future marriage? But we see that happen. Well, this person is right for me. This person is she's such a good girl. Really, what part of this is good? I don't like those conversations. Don't put me in those conversations, okay? Friends who aren't careful with their lives aren't going to be careful with your life. Friends who aren't careful, friends who don't care about faith, are they going to guard your faith? Are they going to care if they damage your faith? If they don't care about your reputation, will they care, or their reputation, will they care about your reputation? In fact, and you've already seen this, friends who aren't careful with their lives, okay, next slide, I'm getting all over the place. Friends who aren't careful with their lives might prefer that you aren't careful with your life. Have you seen that? You know, the person who's always lying, it kind of makes them feel good when they see that you lied. Because now they're justified in their lying. I actually had someone, his kid was hanging out with my kids, and he came to me one day and he said, hey, my kid told me that you say this word and this word and this word. And I'm like, what? And he said, you don't say those words? I said, no, I've never said those words. No, I don't say those words. He's like, used a word. He says, I was hoping you did because it make me feel better about the words I use. Said that to me. That's the way people think. And sometimes it comes out, what they're thinking comes out of their mouth. Friends who can't stop using feel better when there are others who share their addiction. Friendship can be a marvelous thing, and friendship can be the most hazardous thing for us. And that's why friendship requires guardrails. So here are some ideas. They're not my ideas, they're Andy Stanley's ideas, okay? But here are some ideas that can kind of get you thinking of what guardrails could be helpful as it relates to your friends and associates, so that the people you have met don't lead to your greatest regret. Again, I'd encourage you to write these down. Snap a picture or whatever you need to do to remember these. Here's the first one that he gives. When it dawns on you that your core group isn't moving in the direction you want your life to be moving, that should be a guardrail. That should, when you bump up against that, when you notice that your friends aren't going in the direction you want to go, that should light up your conscience. We like the same foods. We like to go to the same places. We have some common interests in these areas. But when I look at the direction this group is going, it's not really the direction I want my life to be moving in. That's a warning. That's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe you've not stepped over the line. You haven't stepped over the line perhaps, but it's a warning. I can't continue to hang out with this group of people the way that I have, or it will take me in a direction that is not good. Where people are heading is a good indication of where they are leading. And maybe you say, well, I don't look at my friend groups. They're not leading me. I lead them. No. Neurologically, what does science tell us? Our brainwaves do align. Be careful who you are hanging around. Now, does that mean that I can't hang around people who are unbelievers? No, that's not what that means, right? But the people you are most close to, they have to know the values that you hold dear. You've got to hang out with wise people if you're going to become wise. So important. Look at the second one. When you catch yourself pretending to be someone other than who you really are. When you catch yourself nodding, but you're really thinking, no, I don't think I believe that. Or when you catch yourself shaking your head because everybody else in the room is shaking their head and you're like, oh, I can't believe he did that. And you're thinking, no, I totally can understand why he did that. I agree with that. That should be a warning to us. A guardrail would bump up against. Light should be going off in our conscience. Saying, are you pretending right now? Because what is pretension? Pretension is the nucleus for a lie, right? You don't want to go there. Because if you start believing the lies, start living the lie yourself, you're going to get trapped. You won't know what's truth, what's error. You'll believe whatever lie Satan gives you. And that would include what he says about you and who you are and whose you are. And so many people, culture is inundated with people who are completely confused in who they are because they've lived a lie. They believed a lie. Don't jump into what you believe Satan is telling you are. Okay, you got to know what God says about who you are. If you are questioning who you are, don't go to culture to figure that out. Go to your Creator to know the truth. If you're feeling the pressure to pretend, you're feeling the pressure to lie, and you need to be warned. It's guardrail. Let's look at the third one. The third one is this: when you feel pressure to compromise. And this isn't not once you have compromised. Once you have compromised, you've already missed the guardrail and you're in the ditch, right? But when you're feeling the pressure to compromise, when you're feeling like, there was a time where at a time you would say, no, thank you. There was a time where you would say, you go on without me. No, I'm going to go on home now. There was a time when you would say that, but now it feels like, well, maybe I'm entertaining the option that maybe this would be okay, or what might this look like if I did do such and such? And when your mind starts to consider compromising, that's a guardrail that you bump up against, and you have to say, I've got to recognize that I cannot go down this road any longer. It should bother you when you begin considering what it would be like if maybe you crossed that line. Here's the fourth one. When you catch yourself saying, I'll go, but I won't participate. If your teenager comes to you and says, yeah, there's going to be some bad things happening there at that party, but I'm going to go, I just won't participate. What's your response? Are you buying that? Are you buying that? Right? Oh, honey, yeah, thanks for letting me know. You go ahead and have a great time. No! Did I tell you last week what my mom always said? It's not that I don't trust you. I don't trust the enemy. I don't trust the devil. But if we won't buy that when our kid tells us that, why would we buy it when our own voice is saying that? I'll go, I just won't participate. I'll be careful. Being careful is putting the guardrail up and not going. Right? Okay? Are we tracking with this? This is good stuff, isn't it? It's not my stuff. This is good stuff. When you start thinking that way, we've got a problem. You can't be thinking that way and be okay. At least you should have bells going off saying, warning, warning, warning. You're saying you're going to go, but you're not going to participate. Warning. The fifth one. When you hope the people you care about don't know your whereabouts. Okay, so let's say you go ahead, this is warning, 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 be careful. You end up going anyway because you say, I'll be careful. They all need Jesus. I'm going to give Jesus to them. I mean, we could say that, right? But then when you show up, you're like, I hope nobody knows I'm here. Warning, 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 right? I hope they never find out. I hope that if they don't ask, I hope that I can get by without getting in trouble. Maybe you do go ahead and go, and you're careful, and you never, you keep your integrity, you're faithful, you don't make a fool of yourself, you don't make a fool of your family, you're not embarrassing them. But you still don't want anybody to know you were there. Is that a problem? If you're considering lying to someone who asks, what's going on? Where were you? That's trouble. These are guardrails. Are we understanding what we're talking about here? This is in the safety zone. This isn't in the danger zone. This is in the safety zone. When we start thinking this way, our conscience needs to light up so that we can say, get out of there. Flee from the very appearance of evil. These kinds of things should bother us. Culture would say, come on. They'll never find out. They don't need to know. It's your life. You're making too big of a deal of this. And if you think this sounds really narrow-minded, and you're asking, why are we making such a big deal of this? Here's the reasons. Number one, I'm a pastor, and I've heard a lot of stories. And no one plans on ending up in the ditch. They just don't. We talked about that last week. No more than you plan to wreck your car, do you plan to wreck your life. You end up there. And I've heard so many stories, and you have too, of thousands tomorrow morning, maybe hundreds of thousands tomorrow morning that will wake up, maybe in a hospital bed, maybe in somebody else's bed. Maybe they wake up with this urgency that I've got to get another hit on that new drug. Or maybe they wake up and they just have to look at themselves in the mirror saying, what have I done? I've got regret on this whole big old long list of our greatest regrets. They are facing some regret. They look at themselves in the mirror and they ask this question: how did this happen? How did this happen? How did this happen to me? How did I end up here? And the answer to that is the answer that has always been the answer. And the answer is this: our friends still determine the direction and quality of our lives. Your greatest regrets involve the people you've met. Friendships are key to life. They're so important. They're marvelous when they're in the right boundaries. But when we let our guard down where we shouldn't let our guard down, they will take us to our deepest regrets. That's truth, isn't it? You can look at all of these points that we went through, these 5 points, and for every one of them, you can give a counterpoint. You can say, but there's this. I'm a Jesus freak. I've got to be in this place to witness. So I'm going to the bars and all these. Maybe so. Okay, that's debatable. See, we're not necessarily talking about right and wrong. We're not talking about black and white. Sometimes we're talking about wise and unwise. And that is debatable. There were people that were always coming to Jesus saying, but there's this point, you're wrong here, you're wrong there. And Jesus, one time, he just kind of maybe just threw up his hands and he said this. He said, wisdom is proved right by all her children. Wisdom, I don't know, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. Your wisdom may be different than my wisdom, but wisdom is proved right by the outcome. Wisdom's not proven in a courtroom. Wisdom is proven by the outcome. Establishing guardrails in life is done with the end in mind. In light of where I want to end up in life and eternity, what is the wise thing to do in this situation? And the scripture says, walk with the wise and become wise. Last week we heard Paul say, be very careful how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Is this helpful? I think this is so helpful to me. And I recognize that for some of us, we don't get to choose our work associates. We're tight with them. I get that. Some of us can't choose the people who we're closest to in a lot of our life. And that is why the church is so important. So important. That's why special friends who are walking the way that Jesus wants us to walk faithfully are so important. That's why we make a big deal of church attendance. That's why we make a big deal of small groups. That's why we make a big deal of Sunday school. Don't you miss Sunday school? I miss Sunday school. Sunday school is returning, I hope. August 15th is our launch date for Sunday school to return. Anybody else excited about that? We need each other. This is important. We need to walk with the wise so that we can become wise. So if we say the amen and we say, oh, that was good, or we say, oh, so-and-so really needs to hear that, I feel like I will have failed. Discipleship for me is taking what I'm learning and helping others with it. I think that's what discipleship is for you as well. Learning so that you can help others learn what you're learning. So ingest it personally first, and then give it to others.